Chapter 9. Interview. Startups. Karen T., or KT Lin, pronouns she, they, we, is a former Chief Experience Officer, CXO, of a seed-stage wellness startup where she instituted a human-centered prioritization model spanning all audiences, B2C, B2B, and internal and back-office ops, across a multi-channel portfolio of iOS, Android, SaaS, and API products. Karen has over 25 years of experience designing web interfaces and over 15 years in design management consulting for Fortune 500s across web, mobile, IT, and IoT applications. She has a degree in human factors psychology and a graduate certificate in interactive design and is also a certified usability analyst, HFI CUA, and a certified Scrum product owner, CSPO. Karen is also currently training to become a certified executive coach and Kingian nonviolence trainer because she believes both are critical skills for empowering more UX professionals to stop UX erasure. Debbie, how do you define customer centricity? Karen, customer centricity is the antidote to fragility and the antithesis of ego-centered product development cultures because it skillfully listens to, observes, continuously learns from, and adapts to the ever-evolving needs and expectations of end users. Debbie, companies, including startups, seem to be forgetting product-market fit. Karen, one of the biggest traps that I see happen with startups is that founders become complacent with their early adopter traction. I call it the single-finger glove trap. Imagine a startup discovers that they have some initial traction after creating a glove that only covers one finger. They get all excited. Oh, this is amazing! Let's go out and now make as many single-finger gloves as possible in as many variations as possible. Because to them, that is how you scale adoption in different markets. That's a trap. They think they have traction, but they don't realize that their early traction is not enough to cross the chasm to reach the early majority. They forget they also need to scale for product-market fit while they're scaling for adoption. A lot of startups put all this money into entering different markets when they only had very loose product-market fit to begin with. Not surprisingly, a lot of them go bust quickly thereafter. Debbie, because everybody surely wants a single-finger glove. Karen, exactly. It's tempting to jump to conclusions, and there's also a stubbornness in not wanting to change what you had to do to get that initial traction. Founders want to double down on what they know has worked in the past instead of continually challenging the assumptions that got them that initial traction but won't be enough to continue growing. Debbie, it sounds like we're falling into the typical cartoon of the MVP car where you make a skateboard, then a kick scooter. You make the single-finger glove and think, that went pretty well. Maybe we should make the glove with 2 fingers. Karen, I don't fault people for tempting to do that, but that's the trap. I'm sure that does get people success to a certain degree, but I'm always thinking about, does that really serve the needs of the public at the end of the day? How well does it serve target users' needs? How sustainable is this? The answer is often, you don't know until you've gotten enough traction. But the traction is a clue into the rest of the iceberg of what is really needed. And if you just stop at the tip of the iceberg, it's a lost opportunity to do more. Debbie, what else do you see startups doing wrong? Karen, there's also the data trap, the quantitative metrics trap of just studying our analytics of what people are doing in our app. The answers are not in your set of analytics because the answers are in what people are doing outside of your product and your app. People are maybe spending 0.5% of their day in your app. If you're only looking at what people are doing during that 0.5% of their day, you're not going to understand why they're doing what they're doing in your app. Many people claim to be about user obsession, but the default right now is quantitative data obsession. Are people going to click on this button? If it's blue or if it's green? Let's try that. You're trying to squeeze some kind of efficiency out of some little thing, but you're shooting in the dark and missing what I call the upstream opportunities that matter way more. You won't get the answer via, people are spending more time in the app now. Every time I use Facebook's app or website, I click on something and something totally unexpected happens. Then I wonder if a product manager saw that engagement went up because of this change, so now they're doubling down on this. They assume it's a good thing because it kept people in the app longer, but in reality, I was in the app longer because I lost my place and I'm just trying to find it again. Debbie, you lifted the metrics. Congratulations! Karen, but for terrible reasons that ended up creating frustration and hurting the brand and overall experience. Debbie, I'm thinking about startups you might have worked with who claim to care about users and customers, but build what the founders want. Where is the disconnect? Karen, follow the money. How is this business making money? What do they prioritize, B2B or B2C? Some startups are using B2C users as bait to attract B2B customers. They're a two-sided marketplace and they've decided that they make their money on the B2B side. They care about users on the B2C side, but only to the extent that they can generate extra value for their B2B customers. How do you find that balance? For some of the companies that I worked with, I went in thinking, great, they're all about improving the UX for both sides of the market. But it turns out that they were just interested in maintaining their leverage over B2C users in service of their B2B customers. They had traction and didn't want to change or evolve their model. They wanted to double down on it and then enter other verticals with a twisted value proposition. There's a tendency for startups to think, build a better trap, and they treat people as if they need to be trapped into using a particular app or service. It ends up creating problems. Even employees internally will feel the disconnect at a company because they are wary of the product they're building. One of the first things I look for when I go work for any company is how people who work at that company feel about the culture. How is the morale? Do they have misgivings, questions, or confusion about their product or brand? If internally not everyone feels like, this is great, this is working very well, that's already a red flag. If people who are being paid to work in the company feel half-hearted about their product or service, and they're being paid to be there, how can you expect the general public to care when they're not being paid? At the earliest chance they can get, these workers are likely to start looking elsewhere. It's the burn and churn that happens with users and employees at some of these companies. Then they have to figure out how to bring people in. Let's give everybody $10 cash just to use the app. They'll funnel a lot of money into marketing to try to get people in, not seeing the underlying issues contributing to retention and conversion problems. And that's a sign that you don't have a value proposition that sells itself. You have to spend all this money to get people in, but then you end up burning users and sometimes employees as well. These companies are not clear on their UX strategy. Everybody's running around like chickens with their heads cut off because the latest investor or board member who joined is throwing their weight around and is demanding otherwise arbitrary changes. Different business units are demanding changes. There's input coming from everywhere, but there's no strategic way to align all these different interests and to really look at what needs to be built. So they just try to build everything all at one time, or end up fighting it out to see who gets their way. That burns people out. You have unrealistic expectations and deadlines, and you're trying to squeeze your labor force to get more value out instead of looking for ways to grow that pie. Figure 19. Email from Venmo, who will give the first 200,000 people who reply to this email $10 just for logging back into Venmo. This could cost them $2 million and doesn't guarantee that anybody uses Venmo more often after that login. Debbie, were there any baby steps or small changes you were able to make that nudged startups onto a path of being more customer-centric? Karen, sometimes it's very basic, like let's do some usability tests. It's one thing for me to come in and give recommendations based on heuristics and my expertise, but it's another thing for me to then show the proof of what's working and what's not working. I do it by collecting the evidence, even if it's finding ways to quantify the qualitative, and then telling the story in a convincing way to decision makers. We have to speak their language and translate the problems that we see end users having into business terms and metrics that matter to decision makers. Let's say people are having trouble creating an account. Find ways to estimate and quantify what is the impact on the business. What are we potentially losing out on, and how much of a financial value can be assigned to that, even if it's an estimate, hopefully a scary one? At least then you can get some attention and hopefully some resources to work on getting to the bottom of the situation. If you just tell people, this is confusing for users, it's very easy to have those insights swept under the rug. There is very much a mentality of having to cut corners in order to keep pushing forward. But at some point, the corners that are being cut are going to come back and bite you in the rear. Whatever holes or leaks you have in your bucket now, as you try to scale and make that bucket bigger, those holes are also going to scale. You'll scale the problems as well as the benefits. I've said that to founders to get them to understand the importance of scaling product market fit while scaling for market adoption. It's important to make sure that there are enough processes in place and enough user feedback loops in place. That'll help close gaps at a reasonable pace as the company is growing and scaling. The tricky part is always assessing what enough means. Debbie, I'm thinking about scary numbers for things. X% of people dropped off here. Another Y% of people dropped off here. We charge for this, so that's Z dollars we didn't make this month. But invariably someone says, it doesn't matter, customers will figure it out. Karen, or they're not our target audience, or they're tire kickers. We don't care about them and we make excuses. If we can't quantify what all of this means to the business won't care. It's not enough to appeal to, oh, we really messed up somebody's day. Can that be translated into cold hard cash? CEOs are liable for the company's performance. They're liable to the shareholders for certain outcomes. If they're being negligent and not paying attention to what's hurting the business, or if they're doing things that cost more money or leave money on the table, then you have to find ways to frame it in that way. That will get some attention. It's just the reality of the business world. Debbie, do you find they respond to warnings of risk and potential failures, or do they have to have failed? Karen, it's a mix of both. Before there is a huge, utter failure, there are a lot of little early warning signs. I look for early warning signs in reviews and complaints. Why are people calling or emailing support? Go look at customer service logs. Look at what people's complaints are. Are there patterns to the complaints? What's the root cause of those things? Are the complaints true? Even if they're not true, how the customer incorrectly perceives our company can also signal problems. I've had moments where we could clearly show customer problems, but the business decision was, we don't want to do anything about this right now. Debbie, jumping to another topic, despite phrases like empowered teams, we are still not seeing teammates treated equally. Karen, I call it product dictatorship when companies and product people have so much power and control that they can dictate what gets built. They don't have to answer to anybody else, and that's where we're running into a lot of problems. User-centered design is the antidote or antithesis to that. It's about making sure that end users are incorporated in the decision-making process of what gets built, what would really serve their needs. Many companies are missing out on real innovation because they're not taking user-centered design methods and applying them to their core product. UX is still off on the sidelines. More understanding of the value of UX in different parts of the organization can help you work closely with UX folks to figure out how to innovate. Debbie, anything else that might help listeners looking to make positive changes and help their companies care more about what users and customers need? Karen, yes, an important strategy to consider is the nature of how businesses are structured to be very product-focused, organized around product lines, and to achieve operational efficiencies. It's very important to try to find ways to counterbalance that type of mindset with deeply understanding what users actually want. Find a way to represent that in your feature prioritization matrix so that you can balance out how the company engages and interacts with customers and end users. Often, the biggest hurdle is a structural hurdle. The people who are making decisions about what the UX should be are thinking from a very product-centered mindset. They're not seeing end users and customers, or sometimes the company, as a whole. Decision makers are thinking about their own problems and which products can help them, sometimes selfishly. That's where having what I call a user experience ecosystem strategy helps. It's like a layer that sits between users and the rest of the business. There has to be a consistent holistic strategy, an overarching UX strategy, to counterbalance the product-centered nature of businesses. Another point of confusion for a lot of people is that we think UX is a proxy for a graphical user interface. UX is the outcome. Design is the deliverable and the process of creating those deliverables. The impact of that design and good UX outcomes are the results of how deeply the product organization actually understands user needs and how often those understandings are factored into the way they make decisions. How good are you at deeply understanding what the needs are? Distributing and diluting UX activities and tasks only gets you superficial results. How often are you using those deep understandings in decisions?